The lockdown. It's strange, isn't it? How your life can change in the blink of an eye from ordinary to something unthinkable. I never thought I'd experience a day that would haunt me forever, but it happened. It was a typical Thursday morning, one of those days where everything seems normal, like any other day at school. But as I sit here now telling you this, I can't shake the memory of what happened. It all started with the announcement over the intercom. I remember it so clearly. Students, we're going into lockdown. Please remain in your classrooms and stay quiet. There was no explanation, no reason, just those words. And in that moment, I knew something was wrong. The lockdown begins. The hallways were eerily quiet. The usual bustle of lockers slamming and students chatting disappeared instantly. I glanced around the classroom, my eyes meeting the faces of my classmates. Everyone looked as confused as I felt. My teacher, Mrs. Thompson, was already locking the door. She didn't seem scared, but I could see the tension in her movements, the way her hands shook just slightly as she turned the lock. "Everyone, stay calm," she said, but her voice trembled, betraying her words. "Just stay quiet, and everything will be fine." But deep down I knew it wasn't fine. It never is. The silence stretched out like a heavy weight pressing down on us. I sat at my desk, staring at my phone, but there was no signal. I tried texting my parents, but nothing went through. I thought maybe it was just a drill. After all, we'd had lockdown drills before. But this felt different. The atmosphere felt thick, suffocating, like something was in the air, something unseen and sinister. Then we heard it. A sound. Faint at first, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the hall. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just one set of footsteps. There were more. It sounded like several people, walking in unison, deliberately circling the hallway outside our door. I looked at my classmates. Some of them were whispering, trying to make sense of it. Others sat frozen, like they couldn't breathe. Mrs. Thompson was at the window, peering out through the blinds, her face pale and tense. Suddenly the lights flickered, once, twice, and then nothing, and we were plunged into darkness, and the fear grows. The room was silent except for the sounds of our breathing. It felt like we were waiting for something, or someone. I heard whispers, but they were too quiet to make out. My mind raced with questions. What was happening? Why were we on lockdown? And those footsteps? Why had they stopped? It felt like hours passed, though I knew it hadn't been that long. The air was thick, heavy with dread. I felt my hands tremble as I clutched my phone again, desperate to find some kind of connection to the outside world. But nothing worked. It was as if we were cut off, isolated in this dark, silent building. Then I heard it again, a tapping like someone lightly knocking on the door. We all froze. Mrs. Thompson stepped back from the window, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay quiet," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a soft voice. Barely a whisper, but chilling all the same. "I know you're in there." My stomach dropped. There was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It didn't sound like a teacher or a student. It sounded like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who was hunting us. The unknown threat. I don't know how long we stayed in that room. Time lost all meaning. The knocking continued, but it wasn't just at our door anymore. It was moving down the hallway. It wasn't just one person anymore. It was multiple. The taps, the whispers, the sounds of shifting, scraping. It all blended together in a nightmarish cacophony. I felt a hand grip my arm and I jumped. It was Emily, one of my friends. She was wide-eyed, her face pale, her voice barely a whisper. "Are we going to die?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was shake my head, not trusting my own voice to speak. My mind raced, replaying every horror movie, every terrifying scenario, wondering if this was what it had all been building up to. The door rattled again, this time more violently. The lights flickered once more. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The hallway went still. We waited in silence, unsure of what was happening, unsure of what was coming next. The resolution. The intercom crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, almost too calm. "The situation is under control. You may return to your normal activities. Thank you for your cooperation." Normal activities after everything that just happened? But there were no sounds of footsteps, no signs of anyone outside. It was like the whole ordeal had just vanished. We stayed in the classroom for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the lockdown, we all slowly filed out, eyes darting around every corner, every shadow. And when I stepped out into the hallway, I saw the truth. The lockers were still locked, the windows untouched, but the hallways, they were completely empty. No sign of anyone. No sign of what had really happened. The thing I'll never forget? The voice on the intercom, so calm, so collected, and the fact that I never found out who, or what, was really out there. Maybe it's better not knowing, or maybe it's worse, but whatever it was, I know one thing for sure, it's still out there. The silence after the silence. It had been 2 years and I could recall. Every moment almost in great detail. It was towards the end of school and everyone was streaming into their last. Period. Mine was history, a class that not only did I do poorly in, but I also utterly detested, especially the teacher, as I walked down the crowded hallway, hearing for what felt like the millionth time that hour that Mr. Thompson was going to groan on through hour one more. Over the Civil War made my stomach churn, and so instead of going to class, I made the decision I thought would save me. From a boring lecture, I snuck into the back bathroom with a plan to hide out, until the bell rang for what may be the last time in my life. I selected the farthest stall to be my haven from the chaos of school life resting my back on. The cool metal wall. I pulled out my phone and hoped it could provide me with enough games or two that might dull my senses, as I waited for whatever was to come. The voice of the principal came suddenly through the intercom like a knife slicing the stillness of that. "Bathroom lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room, lock the door, and turn off all lights at." First, I think I did not hear the urgency. In his voice, I thought it was just another drill. With a dismissive shrug, I kept sitting there, my thumbs furiously tapping on the screen. But just seconds later, the entire building went dark. The bathroom plunged into complete blackness as well. The familiar buzz of the AC unit was silenced, and an unsettling gray shroud fell over me like a blanket. Panicky, my heart started racing. Power had never before been cut as during a drill. I quickly sent a text to my friend, hoping to glean some kind of idea what's going on. "Hey, what's going on?" I typed, my fingers slightly shaking almost. Immediately he replied, "Dude, where are you? It's locked down here." Confusion covered me as I read the message from him. "Everyone's looking for you," he said. Panic was flickering in my chest. When he asked where I was, I told him that I went to the bathroom and hid, feeling confined. I adjusted my brightness on my phone and typed a reply, "Why is it a lockdown then?" He finally answered. This young fellow, wielding a knife, starts banging on classroom doors, asking them to open up, but a cold sweat crept down on my spine. My classroom and the lavatory where I was were on the same floor. This exposed me to grave danger. I turned my cell phone off and listened intently, every little sound echoing ominously in the silence. Footsteps were walking down the hall, my heartbeat in my chest as I listened to the bathroom door open. I held my breath, course fear pumping through my veins. The door swam open and someone stepped inside and went over to the stall next to mine. My heart was racing because of all the horror movies I had watched. The characters were stuck in scenarios like these. Taking a deep breath, I finally found myself able to break the silence. "Who's in here?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. This continued with stilled silence before a shaky voice replied, "I just need to find a hiding spot." I heard of the lockdown. He sounded about my age, so I decided to trust him, at least for the moment. We sat there in awkward silence as our hearts thudded in unison, and could feel the fear between us just then. The intercom crackled with another order. All students please leave school in an orderly manner through the front doors, where police are waiting to take charge. Once again, my heart pounded more. Furiously that this time it was tempered. With a flicker of hope, I threw open my stall door. Peering to my right, I spotted him frozen in position. "Aren't you leaving?" I asked incredulously. He said, yeah, man, just give me a couple of minutes. I didn't put much consideration on it." At that moment, I was more focused on getting away from there. I came out of the bathroom and walked towards the front door, finally realizing with anxiety and urgency what was happening. The further I walked, the ringing started. On my phone again, my friend's messages took over my screen, explaining to me the chaos happening. Outside, a kid a couple of years older than us tried to rob a gas station. At knife point a few blocks away, he stabbed a couple of people, and when he failed, he ran into our school. I couldn't help but shiver at the last sentence. My friend continued. That's why the police existing in the building are looking for the boy who is still hidden somewhere. Inside, panic rose in me, and I started running toward the front doors once, and outside, the chaos of the moment hit me. There were policemen directing students to safety. Their faces were tense with urgency, and I rushed over breathlessly to one of them, telling him what had happened in the bathroom. They stiffened at once, and their faces taking on the grim lines of intent. The officer barked something, and a detail started running to check the bathroom. I watched them race toward this building. Then they came back, not more than 5 minutes later, with their faces set. "There's nobody there," one of the officers said, "but the window inside the bathroom was broken. The kid must have escaped." To shiver down my spine was, well, CED, in the realization that I had just been mere feet from a dangerous criminal, yet no words could depict this as vividly as when I felt both grateful and horrifying because of this realization. School returned to routine after that incident, but for the rest of my life, I would remember that day, the fear, darkness, and the mysterious boy in the stall next to me. That was the day which changed everything in my mind when it came to safety, and I knew that I would carry that moment with me for the title: The Silence After the Sirens. It started like any other day. I woke up late, rushed through my morning routine, and barely made it to school on time. I didn't think anything unusual would happen. After all, this was just a normal Tuesday in a school that felt like it had been running on autopilot for years. But as I sat there in homeroom, listening to the murmur of voices around me, I had no idea that everything was about to change. It wasn't until the sirens went off that the world felt like it stopped spinning. The announcement. It was 9:30 in the morning. I remember the bell had just rung, signaling the start of class. Everyone was chatting, exchanging notes, getting settled in, when suddenly the loudspeaker clicked on. "Attention, students and staff. We are initiating a lockdown. Please follow all safety protocols. Lock doors, turn off lights, and remain silent. This is not a drill." The voice was calm, but there was something about it that made my blood run cold. No explanation, no details, just the cold mechanical sound of the announcement echoing through the halls. For a second, I thought it might be another one of those drills, the ones where you pretend something bad is happening to practice for emergencies. But this felt different. The urgency in the voice, the sharpness of the instructions, it didn't sit right with me. I glanced around the classroom. Mrs. Davis, our homeroom teacher, was already moving quickly. She locked the door and pulled the blinds down over the window, her hands shaking ever so slightly. The air felt thicker all of a sudden, heavier. "Everyone, stay quiet," she said, but her voice cracked, betraying her calm exterior. We all nodded, but none of us moved. I could hear my heartbeat thumping in my ears, louder than the chatter that had filled the room just moments before. The first signs of trouble. We were in lockdown, but the silence that followed felt more terrifying than anything. Our classroom, usually buzzing with energy, now felt like a tomb. No one spoke. The only sounds were the occasional creaks of the building and the distant sirens outside, growing louder and more insistent. I pulled out my phone, instinctively reaching for it, but there was no signal. Nothing. My stomach tightened. "Check your phone," whispered Sarah, one of my friends. "Do you think something's happening outside? Is it a shooter? What do we do?" I didn't have an answer, but I could see the same fear on everyone's face. My classmates, usually full of jokes and distractions, were all tense, their eyes wide, scanning the room as if we could somehow protect ourselves from something we couldn't see. Outside the window I could hear footsteps, not the usual sounds of students passing by between classes, but heavy, deliberate steps. They weren't the hurried footsteps of someone trying to get somewhere on time. No. These were slow, almost methodical, like someone walking with a purpose. My blood ran cold. Then there was a soft thud against the door, and we all jumped. The noise was faint, but it was there. Something had hit the door, just a light tap, but it sent a jolt through my chest. I could see the fear in my friends' eyes as they turned toward me, waiting for me to say something, to do something. But I didn't know what to do. The knocking didn't stop. It continued, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. The waiting game. Time stretched. The clock on the wall ticked, but it felt like it was frozen in place. I wanted to move. I wanted to break free of that silence, but something kept me in my seat, paralyzed by fear. Mrs. Davis was still by the door, staring out the small gap in the blinds. "Stay quiet," she whispered again. Her eyes were wide, and her lips were pale. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. I had never seen her like this before, and the footsteps outside had stopped. But now, there was something else. Something worse. A muffled voice. It was low and distorted, almost like it was coming through a speaker. "Come out, kids," the voice said, barely audible. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." I couldn't breathe. Who was that? Was it a teacher trying to reassure us? Was it someone else? My mind raced with questions, but none of the answers made sense. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there in the dark with that voice, with the knocking, with the growing sense that something terrible was about to happen. The lights flickered, and for a second I thought we were going to be left in complete darkness. But they came back on. The knocking continued, but now it was joined by something else. Muffled shouting. Voices, raised in anger, too distant for us to make out, but close enough to make my skin crawl. The aftermath. Then, just like that, the lockdown was called off. The announcement came over the intercom, calm and steady, like nothing had just happened. "The lockdown is now over. Please return to your classrooms and resume normal activities." Normal activities? After everything that had just happened? We all slowly filed out of the room as if we were moving in slow motion, like we were waking from a nightmare. The halls were empty, eerily so. No one was around. No teachers, no students. It was like the entire school had vanished. I don't remember much of what happened after that. My mind was still spinning. We never learned who was outside that door or why they were there. There were no reports, no clear answers. Some of the other students talked about hearing similar voices and seeing strange things in the hallways, but no one could make sense of it. We were left in the dark, still not knowing what had really happened. The strangest thing of all, no one ever spoke about it again. It was like the entire day had been erased from everyone's memory. But I remember everything. And I'll never forget that feeling, the silence after the sirens, the waiting, the knocking. Whatever happened that day, it wasn't just a drill. If these stories kept you on edge, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. Sometimes the scariest things happen when the world is asleep. Until next time, I'll see you in the next nightmare.